now, brown cow.
Is it how or ow? Ow now.
Did you say it's ow?
Ow or how?
It's how. How? Ow. 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 Now, brown cow.
It's like rice.
What? What is wrong with you today? Have you been drinking?
Just coffee.
You ever shot clay pigeons?
No, I haven't.
So you had 4 clay pigeons at a time, right? Not simultaneously in a round.
2 shoot
right?
off. Yep.
Right. Times 11 rounds. And then when you got really good, they'd fire 2 clay pigeons at the same time. And then on number 9, I hit 2. No, number 10, I hit 2. And number 11, I hit 3. I was getting better. I ran 20 miles and then had to hike up a mountain. The thing was up a mountain. You started at the base of the mountain and you climbed up the mountain. And then I went axe throwing. I got really good at axe throwing. Hey, what are we talking about today? It's Friday.
Sorry, we should get to it.
It's Friday. Let's do it. Let's begin. Woo! It's Friday. They need that kind of energy.
All right, listen.
Yeah.
Recently, you've been talking a lot about self-influence, but the questions that we ask are not only important for us when it comes to sales.
Yeah.
It's more important for the buyers. Tell me about that.
Yeah, more important now than ever before. Sales has always been about exploration. Everything is about exploration. One of my favorite quotes of all times. Well, that sounded really arrogant. One of my favorite quotes that I've said of myself of all time, right, is the quality of your life is predicated on the questions you ask yourself. The quality of your life is predicated on the questions you ask yourself. Well, why is that true? Well, because we ask questions of ourselves all the time. It's usually, why did I make that mistake? Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do this? We want to ask better questions. You have a better life. Who do I want to become? What does the better look like? How do I learn? All these, these are all great questions to ask yourself. Well, the same thing goes for when we're selling. Here's the thing, is selling has always been about exploration. And for the longest time, salespeople believed, and I think they still do to a certain extent, believe that the reason we ask questions is so that we get the information. Now, that is absolutely true. Sales is about exploration because we need to find out how to best serve our buyers. We need to find out what their driver is. We need to find out what they're looking for. We've never lost a sale. I don't think anybody's ever lost a sale from lack of education. We lose sales because of lack of exploration. There is information that the buyer has that we don't know, and because we don't know it, we can't influence it. So it's always been about that. But more so now than ever, our buyers are conflicted. And we did a whole talk about, the conflict within our buyers a couple weeks ago. You can go back and watch it. But our buyers are so conflicted right now, and they're so torn. How can I want something so much and be afraid of it at such a high level as well? And that creates this internal conflict, right? This interpersonal conflict. Well, when we ask questions, the primary reason we ask questions is not so that we hear the information. That's secondary. The reason we ask questions is so that they hear themselves say the information. So we are nothing more than a great facilitator of the conversation they're having with themselves in their head. So, a lot of times what happens is the buyer keeps the conversation they're having with themselves inside their head, which means we can't facilitate it. We can't help them. But more so, the buyer needs to self-influence. And self-influence is the greatest influence. If I try to influence, it's going to, right now in this market, it's going to come off as convincing. And convincing is going to come off as pressure. And so if I educate you and educate you and educate you and educate you and educate you, it's going to create pressure. I want the buyer to influence themselves. So I need the buyer to hear, and then I'll get into the psychology of it in a second, but I need the buyer to hear themselves say, listen, this home just doesn't work for me. This home doesn't work for me because, every day it adds an hour and a half to my drive, my commute, and that hour and a half commute is taking away from me spending time with my kids. And I need to hear the buyer say, our next door neighbor, we have a shared wall in this apartment with an next door neighbor. They play their drums until 3 o'clock in the morning. It affects our sleep. We can't. I need to hear the buyer say that, but the buyer needs to hear them say that, and then they hear the bad, and then I'm going to facilitate a question that says, so how does buying this home help you achieve the life you want to achieve? Well, this home, man, it would cut an hour off my commute. I wouldn't have a shared wall. I'd be able to sleep better, like all those things. So now the buyer hears themselves. Now here's the psychology behind it. When a buyer vocalizes their inner dialogue, they believe what they say 100%. And the principle of influence and persuasion, the second principle of influence and persuasion, is the law of commitment and consistency. So when a buyer voices out loud something, they believe it 100%, and they want to stay consistent with what they've said. So if all through the process, the buyer is hearing themselves have this conversation, this doesn't work, this does work. Yes, I need to make a move. Yes, this is the time. Yes. They hear themselves say it. At the end of the process or during the process, we can always say, hey, based on what you said, based on what you've told yourself, based on what you've told me, that is the closing. What do you think sounds better? When I can say to a buyer, based on what you said or based on what I said? Which one sounds better? Well, absolutely when I can use their words. If you don't ask the right questions, the buyers don't hear themselves say it. If the buyers don't hear themselves say it, they don't self-influence. They don't have to stay consistent to it. So what happens is we don't do this. The buyer is not influencing themselves, and the buyer doesn't influence themselves, then we have to convince them. And if we convince them, it's going to be pressure, and pressure is going to keep a buyer out. This has always been the case, but in a market like we're in today, the greatest salespeople, the people that are going to have the most amount of success, are the ones that get the buyer speaking and facilitate the conversation in their head, right, with themselves. That's all I'm doing. And at the end, I'm just going to say, hey, based on what you said, this seems like you need to make the decision now. That is the reason why right now more than ever, you have to be great at asking questions. This is what I would do if I was a salesperson right now. I would spend any time I have, when I'm not client facing, whether I'm not making prospect calls, follow-up calls, any of those things, right? Realtor calls, whatever. When I am not doing a sales forward movement, I would have a legal sheet of paper and I would literally start writing questions. And if you want to know what type of questions, only write questions that begin with what and how. That's it. I would write what and how questions nonstop. And if you want to know why to ask only what and how questions, tune in next week.